Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I'm Dan Kaufman with Sports Business Journal. This is Emerging Markets, Investment Opportunities in New Sports Leagues. Thank you for joining us. As you're entering the platform, a couple things that I go over on every episode of SBJ Live, so I apologize if you've heard this before. But here they are. There are two things, and they all relate to your engagement and interaction with us. First, there's a chat bubble in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. If you're on mobile, it might be in a different location, but on desktop, it's in the bottom right. If you click on that chat bubble, we'd love for you to introduce yourself there and tell us who you are, where you're coming from. If you see people messaging there and you want to message them, please feel free. We encourage that type of chatter during this conversation. And then right next to the chat bubble, there's a questions bubble. That's where we want you to put your questions. Don't wait till the end. There's no specific Q&A period on SBJ Live. We want to weave your questions into the conversation throughout, and you can upvote questions. So if you see questions in there you just want to make sure we get to, go ahead and upvote the questions, but submit your questions at any time, and our moderator, Chris, will get to them. All right, that's it for me. I'll come back on to close it out, but it's my pleasure to introduce this fantastic group for a great subject. We have Kai Bond, he's partner at Courtside Ventures. Rachel Fleitell, she is the COO at 35V and Boardroom. Paul Hourigan is a partner at Ryan Sports Ventures. Isaiah Kacyvenski is founder and managing partner at Will Ventures. And our moderator is Chris Smith from Sports Business Journal. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. How's everybody doing?
Doing great.
So I know people are coming in still. We're populating the room, but I imagine we're going to have a pretty strong showing. We've obviously seen so many new leagues, new properties starting to crop up across sports. We're seeing established sports with new innovative takes, TGL in golf, 3-on-3 basketball, like the unrivaled league in women's basketball. We're seeing new sports start to break in. Snowboarding, bull riding, sailing, all have new properties. And across both buckets, obviously, women's sports has become a huge theme. So given all this activity and the amount of investment that's going into these new leagues, we thought perfect time to pull together some of the smartest early stage sports investors out there. So we have four tremendous investors with us today. Pull the curtain back a little bit on what they're seeing in the emerging leagues, emerging properties, and what's exciting them most. So before we dive into the nuts and bolts, I'm going to hand the mic to you guys, let you introduce yourselves. So Kai, we'll start with you. Maybe take us through a little bit of Courtside Ventures and some of the work you guys are doing in the early stage league side.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Kai Bond. I'm a partner at Courtside Ventures. We do early stage investment in sports and gaming globally. We've invested in Brazil, Mexico, US, Europe, India, and across several areas of Africa, $1 to $3 million checks. We started our journey in emerging leagues almost a decade ago. We were early investors in Drone Racing League, and more recently, we invested in Baller League. And so we've been, studying the space and looking at it for quite some time. Incredibly excited about the opportunity for entertainment, for high quality sports, for interactivity. So looking forward to sharing our thoughts and perspectives today.
Great, thanks. Rachel, we'll go to you next.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to be here with all of you. Excited for the conversation. I am the COO at 35E, which is Kevin Durant's family office that was co-founded with his business partner, Rich Kleiman. And we also have Boardroom, which is a sports media company that we are building ourselves that sits in the intersection of sports, business, and entertainment. On the investing side, we've been investing in emerging properties for the last 5+ years. Our first investment was in Major League Soccer with the Philadelphia Union. We most recently came into the Snow League, and in between have a handful of women's sports properties, some that are brand new, some that are super innovative that we're excited to talk about later. And we are not a traditional fund. We're a family office, as I said. So our investing strategy is really geared towards how can we be strategic given the small set of resources that we have, but now the breadth of experiences that we've seen across a number of different emerging sports leagues over the last number of years.
Perfect. Paul?
Yeah, Paul Hourigan. I apologize in advance. I'm in Las Vegas right now for Summer League, and I think the heat has affected my Wi-Fi. So if I cut out, apologies in advance, and please just let me know in the chat and I'll switch my video off. Paul Hourigan, partner at Ryan Sports Ventures. We are a investment vehicle investing across 3 verticals: sports properties, sports technology, and sports content and media. I think I'm probably fairly unique on the panel in that I've approached emerging sports as a sponsor, as an operator, and also as an investor. And so I've kind of seen how the sausage is made on the inside. So this will either be informative and helpful, or it'll just be a therapy session for me talking about the trials and tribulations of being an emerging sport. So excited for this panel today.
Hopefully we can alleviate some of your your trauma there. Last but not least, Isaiah with Will Ventures.
Yeah, it's great to be on. Appreciate the invite here. So Isaiah Kacyvenski, one of the founders of Will Ventures. My co-founder and I have been working together for 14 years. We were entrepreneurs twice over. So similar to Paul, having been on both sides before starting Will Ventures, we're now in our third fund. And really look at what was a long time perceived niche market. And I think everyone on this call will agree. Sports is really an amazing vehicle to touch massive adjacent markets. And there's a lot of different reasons around why Silicon Valley had really dinged this space as not having the ability to get to venture scale. And I know we're going to dive into that in a lot of different ways today, where you see this now as an evolving asset class from the leagues itself to enabling technology across the board, where what feels not that flexible actually provides a lot of flexibility and is driven by a multi-billion person large fan base globally as well. So I'm excited to dive into that as well. And kind of relevant to this space, I played in the NFL for 8 years as a linebacker, never a superstar, just grinded out 8 years, barely surviving most of my time with the Seahawks, which was an amazing experience. And I retired, went to Harvard Business School to get my MBA, and that was left on my journey from there. So excited to dig into that.
All right, thank you guys. Appreciate that, and I think that sets the table quite well for a pretty fruitful discussion here. So I'm going to take things off. I think jump ball. Before we get into sort of the investment case, I'm curious to get your guys' perspectives on why are we seeing so many of these new properties and new leagues emerge. Right, we're at the point now where there's 3 volleyball leagues, there's multiple track and field leagues. It feels really reaching a sort of critical mass in some ways. So curious to get your guys' takes on, what is leading so many entrepreneurs and founders to think, there's white space here that's worth exploring, that there's enough kind of fuel in the tank, right, for a real growth trajectory and the ability to establish something that's, self-sustaining and going to have a real longevity to it. So whoever wants to jump in, I will let you guys take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take a crack at it. I'm sure everyone's got to have a lot of perspective here. And what seems like a simple question is actually highly complicated, right? And a lot of different reasons and rationale. If you look at, at the highest level, some major tailwinds, right? Some major shifts in how people are just consuming, right? Just entertainment in general. A massive shift over the last several years has really been this shift from linear cable to OTT and streaming. And what a lot of people thought was going to break sports has actually made it more valuable, right? So sports, live sporting events, right, being the last captive audience is the last thing our lives refuse to time shift. And that is an unbelievably important engagement tool. And you'll see that and that kind of really plays into looking at broader scope around live sports and how that can really be grown over time. And knowing these, everyone on this call can talk about it, right? This is not an overnight kind of success type of story, right? This takes infrastructure, it takes time, but it also takes buy-in early on as well. And I would say that's one of the major trends around that. I would say, if you look at kind of other sports, this emergence of women's sports, the infrastructure has really been laid down for a long time. And really it's now about behavior change and having families sit around and really set up appointment television to watch women's sports. And it should have happened decades ago and it hasn't, but you're starting to see that momentum. And what that does is have a generational shift on how, when those kids grow up, how they're going to change, how they, boys and girls, right? How they change, how they're going to, look at sports, their own family, emerging sports, women's sports as well around that. And that's a behavior shift, right? And that's what it takes kind of over time. And you think about the last thing I'll say on this before I hand off to everybody else, this generational, the customer acquisition cost of zero effectively, right? You're almost born into fandom in a lot of ways and starting that cycle in a lot more different areas is really important. But anyway, I'll pause there and let everybody else chat a little.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points there. I think one of the key areas for us that we find fascinating about this space is not only consumption at home, but consumption in person, right? Live events are something that, we've seen come back, post-COVID, the, experience of fandom, not just at home or on a television, but with groups of people having events. So, when you look at, I'll point to Baller League in our portfolio, like if you watch their either broadcast or their Twitch feeds, like it's a fun thing to go to, right? You're getting people going out and it's an entertainment experience. And I think a big part of sport is not just the 90 minutes of games, right? Or the 3 hours of gameplay. You are a fan for the other 6 days and 20 hours plus during the week. And many of these experiences, when you're going to a football game on a Sunday or a soccer match, like you're spending hours and hours with people who are like-minded and having a good time. So live events, I think, is critical. And then from distribution standpoint, I think it's fascinating. You're seeing when you talk about customer acquisition cost in distribution, many of these events are also being broadcast on Twitch. They're being broadcast on YouTube, right? So the ability to get hooked in, to bring in creators, to get the distribution through the creators out to a larger audience is providing for an interactivity that we haven't seen in traditional sport, right? And that interactivity is key to a younger generation feeling like this is they are participating in and involved with the sport itself, not just a lean back experience. So we're seeing massive changes in the way events are being held, the types of entertainment value they're providing in person, and how fans and users are engaging with them while they are at home as well.
Okay. Paul and Rachel, do you have anything to add beyond what we've covered?
Yeah, I mean, they covered a lot of it. I think we think very similarly. A couple of small additions, just in terms of, at least on the women's sports side, a shift in coverage as well, and really highlighting and storytelling around the stars that have always been there, but haven't gotten the platform, haven't gotten the visibility that now is available because of the new types of platforms that, Kai and Isaiah are talking about, and because of upstarts like Just Women's Sports that we're invested in as well, that is proactively telling the story of the women's game in a way that it hasn't quite been until now, that there's enough accessibility and there's enough conversation that it really makes sense. I think those new voices are really helpful in accelerating, certainly on the women's side, some of these new sports, and I think that transcends as well onto the innovation side. And then I will also add the way that younger consumers want to be a part of the things that they are consuming and feel like they're tied to is also what draws us to real innovation around sport itself. So maybe it's a sport that has existed forever, and now suddenly you're turning it on its head with technology, with accessibility, with the event experience itself, feeling like you are right there in a way that you haven't been able to before. Those are some of the things that just get us really, really excited about where we are at this moment in time in terms of investing in emerging sports.
Okay, got it. Paul, rather than trying to force you to find something here on the margins, we'll reframe it a little bit for you. Yeah. When you guys are looking at the emerging space, how much are you thinking about this as, a zero-sum game, right? There's a set number of sports fans and you're trying to carve out your share versus, how much of this is sort of fan creation, right? That you can find new innovative ways, whether sports that people have been participating in for years and years and years, or newer sports and more exciting sports, right? Is there a sense here that you can kind of find fandom that didn't exist previously?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of ties back to what Rachel, Isaiah, and Kai just talked about. For a long time, sports was dependent and sort of gate-kept by the distribution channels. So the ESPNs of the world, the broadcast networks, you had to get picked up by them in order to get seen and also talked about. And that no longer exists. And so if you break away that wall where that's not a requirement to getting noticed by fans, and you can have a one-to-one relationship, then that opens up sort of a fragmentation of sports, but also a personalization of it. So if I have an interest in a niche sport that would never have a chance to get covered otherwise, but suddenly I can build a grassroots community and I can be covered by Just Women's Sports, if I can be shown on Twitch, if I can create my own streaming connection with my fans, then suddenly I've opened up a network and a community that wouldn't have existed even 10 years ago. And so that's where we think it's really exciting, is that now you can actually personalize the fandom around sports to what people's interests are versus what's being pushed down sort of from the distribution channels.
Okay. So I think that's a perfect segue then into, as investors, what gets you most excited. And I don't want you to repeat yourself here, because obviously it's gonna be a lot of the things you guys just covered, right? That's the stuff that is, fueling the rocket here. How much of the investment case is just a simple pattern, hey, this is a relative, not cheap, but right, a lower expense to get into something that could be big in the future, right? Just a classic venture approach. And what else beyond maybe just the cost of entry for you guys is most exciting for you, right? That having that whiteboard, right? That being empty, be able to kind of build something from the ground up isn't an easy job. Paul, you kind of hinted at the challenges and the struggles there at the outset, but also gives you so much freedom and flexibility, right? So just curious as investors, what maybe gets you most excited when you look at And Paul, can kick it back to you if you wanted to keep running with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from our end, what I talked about in terms of the fandom piece is most exciting for me. So you're starting to see these building blocks of groups of fans talking and becoming fans of sort of the indie band of sports, essentially, and being part of the growth of that, and sort of having, I think Kings League, Baller League, some of these new emerging competitions that are coming out, rethinking the way. To me, that's really exciting because it's not reliant on the traditional means of revenue generation. So 50 to 60% of most traditional media is derived from the national revenue. You don't have that in these other leagues. So they have to be really smart, and they have to start thinking about other ways to monetize that fandom. To me, that's a really exciting challenge. And if you get it right, if you're able to create these large followings, especially for the next generation consumer, that's extremely valuable for brands. Sitting on, having sat on the brand side in the past, that's something that traditional sports has not had an opportunity to fully do yet. I think you're seeing some of the leagues that are starting to really pivot and to try and focus more on the next generation consumer. But it's hard because they're getting a massive check from a linear network that doesn't really give them the full incentive. These new startup leagues, they have to figure out other ways to make money and to capitalize on this fandom. And so it's really exciting to see some of the innovation that's coming through in this space.
Yeah, I think, I'll chime in a bit from our perspective. I think, anytime we make an investment in a new category and we talk to dozens of companies, we're looking for, what are the ingredients? What are the elements that are going in that are a common baseline that will drive the entire industry forward? And some of that is technology, some of that is distribution, some of that is social and engagement. I think fundamentally, when we look at this, like, one of the core elements for us are the rule changes that are going in, right? You have a younger generation and the attention span is just shorter, right? There's a generation that's grown up on, Netflix and Disney Plus and Paramount that don't deal with commercials well, right? And so what are you doing in terms of length of the game, right? We've seen every existing league out there try to figure out rule changes to shorten the game, but fundamentally, a new audience is looking for highly engaging content. So there's slight changes around, things that will shorten the form. But I think the rule changes when you look at, no back passes in a football match. So once you get the ball over midfield, you're not playing backwards and slowing the game down, increases the intensity and the pace of the game. When you look at things that TGL have done where, there's the clock, in addition, you're allowing fans to yell, right? Like this type of Ryder Cup energy. So again, it feeds into the intensity of the event, right? And I think more and more you want this level of entertainment to be highly engaging at pace. And that's what's going to keep it right. We're looking for exits and outcomes in, 7 to 10 year timeframes. So we're not just focused on the current viewership, right? Who's the next generation of spenders and how are they going to be engaging with this content? And what does that mean for the level of engagement? And we've seen the ages of traditional leagues and audience viewership, those ages are going up and up and up, right? Prices and tickets are going up. It's becoming more expensive, in some cases prohibitively so. And so when you can engage an audience and then you take in technology, things like playback TV, it's fascinating, right? What do watch parties look like now, right? How can I have my friends hang out and talk about the game? I don't want to just be on text messenger. I want to see your face, I want to stream the game, and I want to be highly engaged in that. And so I think there's these distinct elements around, modifications of rules, engagement, and social that feed into each one of the types of sports. And each sport is very different. And we're now challenging ourselves. And what is that definition of sports? We saw this initially with eSports being a completely different type of sport from stick and ball. Now we're seeing, the X games like skateboarding, snowboarding come into the mix as well. And a younger generation is looking at this, believing, and I don't know how many people out there are skateboarders, but it's as painful and hard as many other sports when you're busting your ass trying to figure out how to pull something off. And so what is the definition of sport and how are you engaging is critical.
Isaiah and Rachel, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. So like Kai mentioned this and Paul did too. It's got to be a big swing, right? And there's got to be a big vision eventually. And that's not going to be done overnight, as I already alluded to, and several others did as well. And that has to be there, right? And the underwriting around that has to be there where you can start to understand that. And obviously having a lot of different characteristics that we look for are really, really important, right? How do you have that swing, that really, really, really big swing, but get through really this kind of chasm of death of like, season 1 to season 2 to season 3, right? Where there is some capital intensive nature to building a league across the board. And, the framework we look at, like, are you going to have access to top talent, right? And that's going to be a big driver. Are you going to be able to de-risk, with sponsorship, right? To get through those first several seasons. And that's one of the big drivers as well. You de-risk through distribution, right? High quality distribution across the board. We're investors in the Snow League. We're investors in TGL as well. Both those fall under those characteristics. We like to, and this one's a little bit more qualitative, but like, is there virality in moments for the sport as well? We look at, and that's one we've really kind of learned over time. Is like, there's an importance around that. And it's very, very spot on to what Kai was saying as well. And I would also say, tied into that, this commitment to storytelling is really important. If you look at the rise of the NFL and the NBA as two amazing examples, that commitment to storytelling decades ago and committing to that over time has really helped tell the individual athlete story, the owner story, other aspects around that has been unbelievably important for people having a deep passion and connectivity around that. So that commitment to storytelling over time really plays a key role. And like, obviously, one of the gold standards, if you think about kind of growth over the last 2 decades, right? F1's a great example, right? And that commitment to storytelling they had is an unbelievable example. And you continue to see that in a lot of different ways as well. So that is something that we look at in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think
I'll put a new spin on it. We've had a few questions coming in from the chat around, sort of along what Isaiah's talking about. What are the things that you're looking for, right? I imagine you guys have a tremendous amount of deal flow. You have any number of these new leagues and properties you can invest in, right? What's the checklist for you? How are you thinking through, what matters most when you're determining, where you want to deploy your capital?
Yeah, for sure. So, for us as a smaller, non-traditional fund, the ability for us to be impactful is often quite important. So are we finding an entrepreneur? Are we finding a leader of that league that understands, actually, to Isaiah's point, the importance of storytelling? That's a thing that Boardroom, as our portfolio company, can actually be really impactful with those new emerging leagues. So how do those things kind of come together? We're looking for unique business models. So League One Volleyball started as youth roll-up. So it kind of covers some of these targets that we're talking about. You're already building the fan base. You're building a pipeline of talent. You're building additional areas to monetize before you even launch the league. So the league ends up being the icing on the top, on the cake, with a bunch of fundamental elements already existing within the business. That was super appealing to us because the fundamentals are ultimately, yes, there's a ton of capital that needs to be invested to continue to grow. How are teams going to get structured? Are you doing franchises? Is the league going to own all the teams when you've already got a baseline for the business, or you've already got a baseline in the Snow League with a talent who is so at the forefront of telling that story for you? Those elements that feel really unique and hard to replicate are often top on our list as we kind of sort through which one of these do we want to pick amongst many that are coming out. So I would highlight those couple of things. And again, we like to try and tie it back, again, since we're small and are making fewer investments, the final yes is going to be, is this something that we can spend real time on to be impactful within our emerging sports portfolio, and make sure that that box is always checked before we decide to move forward.
Okay, same question, Paul and Kai. I'd love to get your guys' takes on sort of, in that due diligence, what are you really keeping an eye on? What matters most to you guys?
I think it's, all of the core elements we typically look at in any venture investment, right? You're talking about the team, you're talking about TAM, you're talking about, domain expertise, right? We can go through the full list, but as it pertains to this space in particular, when we look at the business model, I think there's a certain amount of baseline that we need to have, right? How are you approaching sponsorships? What are you doing through distribution on social? What is the actual, revenue plan around merch, around ticketing? I think the need to believe for many of these businesses, if you want to get really big, is eventually what does your broadcast rights look like? And what is the fundamental structure of that league? Are you going to own these teams? Are these teams going to be spun out and sold? Is that revenue going to drive back in? How are you franchising, right? So, whatever that path may be, right, we need to evaluate and have strong conviction based on, our expertise, our co-investors, right, other folks we're working with, that they can execute against that plan, right? And a lot of the time, again, it goes back to the founder, it goes back to the market size, but they're the core, components of, how do you scale to a venture scale outcome? I think over time, if you want to get to venture scale, you're going to need to have media rights, broadcast deals, and you need to be able to sell teams off and have them drive real value. And those are the long-term drivers, I think, that will allow or, make or break whether this drives venture returns.
Paul, we missed anything that you guys are paying attention to?
Yeah, I think to Kai's point, is a lot of the traditional things that we look at, but I would say number one is the management team and the ownership group. If you don't have aligned and informed owners, no matter how good the product is, it will fail. And that's something that I've seen for the last 15 years in emerging sports that I've been involved in. That will be the death knell. So you're only as strong as your weakest ownership link. The second part is then the revenue side. So do you have a diversified stream of revenue that's not simply reliant, as everyone has in their deck, this sort of like hockey stick growth? Once we get our media rights deal, then all the problems in the world will be solved. We don't have to worry about anything. So are you approaching it in a intellectually sort of honest way in which you're saying, here are the things I can actually get done. I can sell some merch. I can put on some live events. I can create some digital memorabilia or merchandise that no one else has done, but my fans really love. Like, what are the smart ways that you can actually get revenue in the door? Or do I have a cool hack? Do I have Sean White as a founder, and therefore I can sell sponsorships because I know that people are going to want to get his visibility and his reach as an athlete? That's sort of baseline number two. The main thing, though, I think comes back to this notion of, unless people care, unless you have a way to get people to care about the sport, none of this matters. And the sports that I've been involved in an emerging sports standpoint, the number of them that have fired their chief revenue officers 7-8 times within the first 5 years is probably, I would say, 90% of them. And they think that it's a revenue generation problem. It's not. It's a fan problem. And so what it comes down to is the fan is the product. The fan are the people that will get you a media rights deal. The fans are the ones that will get you the sponsorship deals. The fans are the ones that will buy tickets and merch and everything else. Unless you have a unique way to mobilize and excite fans, then you're going to lose, no matter what those other pieces of the puzzle are. So that's kind of I would say that's the threshold one that really typically gets my attention.
Can I follow up on something as it pertains to that just really quickly with Paul's, and I'm curious for the panel's perspective on this as well. And I think when we view it, we always say like high quality competition is what inevitably will make fans engaged, right? There's a lot of other things, storytelling, approachable personalities, right? And there's obviously needs to be an entertainment value, but to me, the highest form of entertainment is a high quality of engagement, participation, competition for the athletes that are there. And can you attract the right players? Can you attract the right, formats to make sure that you're maximizing how well that competition is executed?
Kai, follow up to.
Can I rebut to that one just very quickly?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
I agree, but you can't get so caught up in the competition that you lose sight of the fan. And I say that, and there was a emerging sport that I won't mention, that the first board meeting I went to was an 8-hour board meeting, which first of all should have been the number one sign that something was wrong, that we were having an 8-hour board meeting. But the word fan was never mentioned in that first 8 hours. And so they talked about the salary cap violations from other teams. They talked about, how many international players you could have on your team. And they talked about the competition. And I agree, but for a lot of these new sports, especially sports that are popular elsewhere and you're trying to make them popular in the US, no one knows why they should care about that sport. So if you have the best players in the world, in the early stages, I agree with you, Kai. In the later rounds, when people are educated and informed and know why they should care, that this person is better than this person. In the early stages, you've got to think about the sort of fan journey of how they get to care about why that's a good player. And so I think there's just, I agree 100% with what you're saying, Kai, but I think there's a distinction that you can't get so wrapped up in. And I think that's often happens when you have owners that are passionate fans of the sport. They forget what it takes to get someone to get interested in that sport, and they focus overly on the competition itself without understanding the sort of fan journey.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Kai, I agree with you with the strong butt from Paul as well. And there's some great examples, not only building around the fan, and not to say that's the be all end all, but that's got to be a really, really important piece of that. I would also say building around the athletes as well. And you're starting to see that across the board in a lot of new emerging leagues. There's a ton of opportunity to reinvent. And there's a lot of different examples, like, what the Savannah Bananas are doing, what Jesse is doing there is amazing, right? And he's giving the people what they want, because that has been front of mind, right? That wasn't an afterthought. That was the front of mind. Very, very conscious and methodical decision around that, which is great. It's an obsession with, let's get the most out of the fans. And honestly, let's have the athletes enjoy it as well. And that really is kind of this flywheel you can create. And, this idea of fans and athletes coming together, the PLL, what Paul's done over there, amazing job around being able to do that. The Snow League, what Sean's doing there as well, TGL as well, kind of all of that kind of coming together, really, really important. And again, you can go on and on some great examples of that.
Are there new revenue streams that you guys are seeing with some of these emerging properties that maybe haven't been, either leveraged or accessible to kind of more traditional sports?
I mean, I have perspective on this, not to take up anything. I'll make a quick comment. I would say there are potential new ways. I would say some of the new ways particularly around sponsorship dollars, the endemics versus non-endemic, I think is interesting, right? Being able to tap into. F1's an amazing job of this, right? Like really gold standard on that as well, but continue to branch out across the board. I would say the Snow League's done a great job as well. Like if you have like a Tiffany and Ineos both coming into on sponsorship dollars, being able to participate, that's amazing, right? And they're going to start to see more of that, create a kind of larger size of the pie as well, particularly with such a large, passionate, global, participatory fan base, right? Which, Chris, you alluded to early, another important piece of that too. But okay. Hand off to everyone else here on their thoughts too.
Yeah, I think it's rethink. Go ahead, Rachel. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, some of our, particularly on the women's sports property side, there's so much, even within leaving aside broadcast, just so much within sponsorship that is untapped and requires more and more innovation, I think, to Isaiah's point. And also, there are brands now coming in that previously hadn't really gone to touch men's sports, but now are in this space because it feels like it's a different audience, there's a different product, and there's a different way that female athletes are going to interact with those brands that male athletes that make tons of money are maybe less likely to do. And so as you're thinking about how you leverage like the players themselves with the brand of the team to then find a great partnership and unlock more dollars, I think there's a lot more creativity to be had within a traditional space that could drive additional dollars, particularly in some of these emerging sports teams and leagues. I think the other thing that kind of touched on a little bit before, is like really thinking about the event as the foremost revenue generator out of the gate before there is a big media rights deal, and what is every single possible way that you could creatively monetize that event on the ground. Because for the beginning, that is going to be a much larger percentage of your revenue than hopefully it is 5-10 plus years out as the media rights start to catch up for some of these emerging areas.
Okay. Paul, is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I think personalization is probably the key. And so, traditional sports leagues don't have a lot of information, as crazy as it sounds, about their fans, because they have so many partners, and especially distribution partners, that they don't get the full understanding who those people are. But if I own my own OTT platform, and if I drive people to my owned and operated platforms that I have, and I'm centralizing that data, suddenly I can serve those people in a much more unique one-to-one way than traditional sports can. And so I think there's a depth of engagement that maybe is counter or sort of counters the lack of reach that most of these emerging sports have. That's really exciting and possible. If I can really start serving those people on a one-to-one basis, the things that they want, whether that's digital memorabilia, whether that's merchandise, whether that is special experiences, and then I can package that and then sell that to my sponsors. That to me is probably the most interesting part about emerging sports, but takes a level of planning and foresight that I think, unfortunately, a lot of emerging sports try to copy the traditional sports model and miss what their competitive advantage should be.
I would love to get your guys' take on what these founders are looking for from you, right? Beyond just the check that you're cutting to help fuel their dreams. How have you guys been able to lean in, right, and provide advisory or kind of help them figure out the right moves to make? And within that, would love to get your take on, have you found opportunities to leverage other companies in your portfolios, right? Rachel, you mentioned Just Women's Sports, right? How they kind of give you a media lever to pull on. Isaiah, Kai, Paul, I know you guys invested in a bunch of tech companies, right? Obviously, a lot of these startup leagues need to kind of build out their tech stacks, need to be thoughtful about what companies they're working with. So we'd love to get your guys' take on sort of how can investors lean in, help these leagues kind of get their feet under them, and then leverage the other companies in their portfolios.
Sure, I'm happy to dive in here if it makes sense. But, I think for the way we approach working with portfolio company CEOs is on a case-by-case basis. Some people are product visionaries, some are deep technologists, some are great at brand and storytelling. So you're really just trying to identify, like, where is the weakness? You're probably great at 5 things and just okay at a couple of others. And so once we identify those, we're looking at, the core value proposition, from other CEOs in our portfolio, right, who've been through this and been on the journey. I think, as a former founder several times over, I think most of my most valued feedback comes from other founders who are going through it at the same moment in time. So we try to connect them and stay out of the way. But, they're the basic block and tackle things, right? Company formation, structure, tech partnerships, brand partnerships. But, we don't have a platform team. We don't spend a lot of time. I think a lot of firms build out these functions and spend a bunch of time on them. And our approach is, if you're investing in a great founder, most of the time they'll tap you when they need you. And if you can help, you offer up that support. But I do think that when we look at the social components of what it means to, we worked in eSports and have invested extensively in eSports, right? Huge fan engagement, light on monetization, right? But they've done a lot of things well on the social side, right? And if you see the early streamers, the Mr. Beasts, right? The Speeds, the Kai Cenats of the world, many of them have moved over into sports. And why is that? Because you can demand and get a live audience alongside, right? So a lot of the lessons we talk to them about is like, what have we seen go well with the interactivity in the outreach to the audience and the fans that have worked so well in the esports world? And can you bring over certain elements and components of that interactivity to a live sporting event? And what does that mean in the build-up, day of, and then, post-match, post-game?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Agree with a lot of what Kai said. For us, we are very much, we've got a tight portfolio. We're not hundreds of companies, right? And invest with conviction. We are really, we've got a team of 10 people spread out across 4 cities. we're going to roll up our sleeves and add as much value as possible. And what Kai said, like in the end, you very much want to back the most talented entrepreneurs, right? Pushing into the largest markets, and that domain expertise, you want them to be experts in the space, right? And but we also have connectivity in the spaces that we dabble in that could be complementary as well. And the efficiency around backing amazing entrepreneurs and having, pieces in place where we can help with strategy, we can help with research, competitive landscape, hiring, downstream capital as well. All of those really important, but really what's that mean? It boils down to helping to drive efficiency in the entrepreneur's day, being able to connect the dots quicker, being able to get to a great relationships we have with a sponsor or some level of hiring, it's whatever that may be. It's really rolling up the sleeves and helping with that across the board. So agree with a lot of what Kai said and adding a little more to that too.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in from our side. We have a whole operating company, so we don't have a bunch of investors. So we do approach most of our investments thinking about what is the little bit that we can do to be helpful. And so I think for the last couple of years, at least, sometimes it's showing up directly, helping with a new event, helping with a fan engagement opportunity. Sometimes it's content specific. How do we drive and amplify? Because we have Boardroom, or we can introduce you to Just Women's Sports, or we are connected with the right people who can tell the right stories. So for PLL, for example, we helped them with their street lacrosse launch, fan engagement, easy pull-up version of lacrosse that could happen in a city, so you can bring in new interest to the game. That was a lightning experience of getting to visualize what lacrosse was and having new people get to play a little bit. So we were able to help them bring the right talent to show up. We were able to help them amplify that story through our Boardroom channel. So just continuing to be alongside of that storytelling and brand building is really important, at least for us from a 35E and Boardroom side. And then, we're now invested in a handful of leagues at the league level who've gone through the existential conversations around, do we franchise or do we not franchise? And some of those considerations can be tied through regardless of what the sport is. And so we've been on a number of conversations with our portfolio companies, just kind of going through, as we look at a team versus a league, what are we considering? As these other companies and entrepreneurs have gone through it, what have been the things they've considered? What have been some of the pros and cons? And just being part of those strategic conversations and bringing in some of what we've heard and seen through our experience across the last number of years is where we try to be as helpful and impactful as possible.
Before we start wrapping up, I want to turn the focus a little bit to the future. I really had two kind of big questions I wanted to ask the group. First off, obviously we've been talking a lot about so much activity in this space, right? We've seen so many new leagues start up. Curious if any of you guys have concern about oversaturation here, right? And maybe through the lens of traditional venture investing, right? You're typically going to invest in a bunch of companies and expect that 60, 70% or more of them might fail, right? And it's just the smaller percentage of huge successes will make up the difference. Is that fair to apply here with these emerging leagues? I mean, are we going to see a number of these maybe, kind of fail to figure out how to, maintain scale and fall away? I mean, how do you guys see this space playing out next 5-10 years?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we were investors in Major League Pickleball. They've already had a consolidation, in the last year and a half. Where Isaiah, I think, had mentioned, yes, there are a number of volleyball leagues. We are in one of them. I don't anticipate there needs to necessarily be a multitude of volleyball leagues. There might need to be tiers. There might be a way for that to be sort of one funneling into the other, but ultimately, I think it's a mix of all we said, like, what is the absolute best product and what is the most exciting thing for fans to have? And at some point, there's only so much time, even though the amount that fans are able to consume has expanded tremendously, there is still so much that's competing for that time in that space. And so I do expect that across some of these sports that have seen a bunch of different things pop up, there will be some amount of consolidation and some things that pop away. And also, I think the innovation coming through these emerging sports and leagues, whether they become successful or they push like some adaptation at some of the major leagues, I think overall it is good for the future of sport and the future of fandom for there to be these challenger leagues that are really saying you can use technology differently, you can talk to fans differently, you can have your players do things differently, you can care about your players in a different way than some of the leagues have in the past. And that I think overall is great for sport kind of broadly.
Okay. Rest of the group, would love to get your take.
Yeah, I would say, not everybody's going to make it. And I would say, I think it's similar to looking at venture overall. Like there has to be, a lot of thought be able to put into choices. So it's not going to be the good ship lollipop. Not everybody's going to make it, right? And that idea around really having a disciplined approach, where you have a framework that, again, we've kind of talked through already, is important, right? And a lot of this comes down to the people, to the execution, and a bet on where fans and engagement can go over time as well. So anyway, those are my own two thoughts. I know we're running up on time around this, but
I mean, venture, capital deployment comes in waves. We're seeing it in multiple areas. We see it in AI, and that's probably the one that's most front and center. You're seeing it in sports, and you see it in sports in many ways. You see it in private equity and team ownership. You see it in emerging leagues. So I think this is a natural part of how cycles work in venture. Obviously, some will fail. I think the real question for us is, how many get to venture scale outcomes, become very large established. And then as the maturation of the sports asset class continues, what we've seen in, roll-ups in youth sports, we're seeing different types of outcomes now, right? And this comes with an overall maturation of an asset class. And so, a dozen years ago, you're seeing very few private equity firms. Now you see dozens, right? What does it mean to operate a successful, private equity portfolio of investments where some of these might do $25 to $50 million, be profitable businesses? There's an audience that you're out there after, and you can take 5 or 10 of them, create a 250 million EBIT company. And that's a very attractive, profile for consolidation and a roll-up. So, early days in this, I think time will tell. But there's a level of excitement, I think, around the space because of what it means for the fan, what it means for entertainment, what it means for experience. And so we're all naturally drawn to it. I think saying no to a lot of these things is the hard part, not saying yes to all of them, because, you love the founders. We love the space. There's a reason why we all operate in the worlds that we do. And we want them to be successful. And so to the extent we can be helpful and, we obviously have co-invested with Will on multiple things. Rachel's kind enough to host us. Paul hopefully will be helping our CROs not get fired. So, this is a great opportunity to collaborate. And, that's the essence of sport. Hopefully, we carry that on as investors in the space as well.
As we wrap up, one final question, and Kyle, use your comments as a jumping off point here. When you think about venture outcomes, right, we're talking about exits. Obviously, you guys are going to need to exit these emerging leagues at some point, return capital to your shareholders. What does that look like? I realize that's going to be very much a case-by-case basis and it may not be easy to generalize. But do you guys anticipate selling to larger investment funds, private equity? Is there an opportunity here for traditional leagues to come in as owners, right? We saw Major League Baseball take a stake in Athletes Unlimited earlier this year. Are there other ways, right, that you envision an exit here where you guys are able to kind of peel off and, set them up on that trajectory under kind of new ownership or maybe more well-capitalized ownership? So curious to get your take there on how you guys are starting to think about, what the end of the road looks like for your investments in some of these emerging properties.
Yeah, I think, Kai mentioned it. It all starts with this is an evolving asset class. And really, again, the time has come, right? I think it's been long awaited where you have this, this global passion that everyone can really understand and really access in a lot of ways. That's a really important piece. And kind of the hallmarks around all of that are, the large generalists moving in the space that Kai talked about that are downstream capital, right? That can make acquisitions, right? Where you have massive funds, understand that there is value in this space, value long-term as well. And those are large generalists. You have large sector-specific funds as well. And you think about kind of sovereign wealth funds moving into space with a keen eye around sports, and that as an important driver. I would also say this too, like looking towards the future, because I know as part of like the question was based around that. You're starting to see, the FANG companies dabbling in sports media rights now, and with great success. It's not crazy to think they're going to want to own the most premium assets in and around sports as well for that. So, I think a lot of different areas, a lot of optionality. Obviously, building a strong, long-enduring business is going to be a key component around that.
Okay. We'd love to get the rest of the group to chime in before we close up here.
Are you frozen, Paul? I'm happy to go. Yeah, same. Again, we're in some teams and we're in some leagues. So I think from a team perspective, there are likely a handful of different exit opportunities. And then from a league perspective, I think a lot of what Isaiah said, I definitely think about as well. But we're certainly feel like we're early enough that there is opportunity for just valuations to be increasing and additional investors to be coming into these spaces, at least from our perspective. And then, I think as the whole space evolves, we're sort of excited to see what other new players, what other roll-ups may be able to exist. We barely touched on, Kai mentioned youth, we barely touched on youth sports, and that I think I've seen, a dozen youth sports related opportunities in the last 6 weeks. So there are all these parts of this space that continue to grow and show up in different and unique ways. So it'll be exciting to see for the next 5+ years who else is kind of showing up and what those exit opportunities might be.
Yeah, I think you can look at, probably the most successful emerging or challenger league. It feels strange to say that when they have billion-dollar valuations, but Major League Soccer emerged following the last World Cup. And if you follow the ways in which they have, Providence came in, people were able to take some money off the table there. The team valuations have skyrocketed. There's still lots of headwinds that league is faced with, but you can kind of follow that pathway of like some of the ways in which people can take money off the table within there. And then I think to Rachel's point, because this is a new frontier, there's going to be new entrants. They're going to come in and look for consolidation opportunities. Somebody in the chat had talked about, is there the ability to do roll-ups across sports? And so do you have a central hub that shows the OTT distribution of all of those and has shared services across multiple sports? Things like that will start evolving as we start rethinking these emerging sports. So I think there's multiple ways in which we can see liquidity here. The key is, can you become sustainable and can you build a good fundamental business? Most of these none of these leagues will fail, but 90% of them will run out of money. And so that will be the big challenge is, can you make a strong, financially sustainable business? If you can, there'll be multiple liquidity options off the back end of that.
Okay. Kai, we'll give you the last word if you want to put a bow on the conversation for us.
I'll just end with a yes. No, look, I think everyone covered it well, right? There's IPO, there's M&A, there's PE, there's tons of different avenues. I think the one very interesting, perspective on this is, and what we haven't talked a lot about is, how AI is impacting, all of this. And for me, I look at gaming as a huge opportunity that we invest in heavily. And the democratization of content creation through LLMs has become something that's very real. I think the democratization of game creation will be something that's very real. And I know that all of the large publishers and studios look at, sports as a key pillar for revenue, whether that's the Take-Twos or the EAs. And I think that with this new generation of content creation, of UGC, we've seen large publishers acquire social networks recently. We've seen social networks looking at creator space and economy. And there's this very unique intersection 5 to 7 years out where interactive entertainment, whether that comes in the form of a sport or an esport or on the field, is going to be a valuable part of the portfolio. So I wouldn't even, throw out today that the large publishers are looking at, but in 10 years' time, I think sports and interactive media will be a major part of all publishers globally. And that's like the wild one I'll leave you with for like the 10 years out of how this will impact them.
All right, lots of exciting stuff to look forward to. So we are unfortunately out of time. I feel like last time we left on the bone here, international, someone mentioned sovereign wealth. So, but what an incredible conversation, I think, to start digging into this subject. So thank you guys so much for your time today and for sharing your insights.
Chris, what a great way to hand it off to me to tell everyone that if you want more of this, come to Dealmakers, our sports finance conference in New York in November. Chris will be there. I hope all of you will be there as well, and plenty from the audience. We thank you very much, Kai, Rachel, Paul, and Isaiah, for your time. To the audience, thanks for sticking around. This was a great, great episode. We will see you on the next episode of SBJ Live. Take care. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Kai.
Happy birthday, Kai.
Thank you.